patrons.
The Koreans didn't get off the boat as impecunious, uneducated people the way the Europeans had done in 1880. And I had to tell them, well, the Koreans who come here are not from the lowest class of Korea. They do not arrive with no money. They do not arrive with no education. They have resources.
It's also important to realize that Koreans coming from Korea don't think of themselves as minorities. I mean, they've grown up all their lives as part of a majority, so the topic, the concept isn't even sensible. When you come to the United States, you learn after a while that there's majority groups, minority groups, people of color, communities of color, ethnic, racial categories. But Koreans were just Koreans. They didn't see themselves as part of that other larger group of minorities.
I'm not certain that the Korean economy was fully aware of the fact that it needed to recycle that dollar some way.
In the literature, the sociological literature on blacks, there's a lot of treatment of their attitude toward external business owners. The attitude, and this goes back to the 1930s, if not even earlier than that, is that external business owners have no business in the black community, that they are taking up opportunities that otherwise black Americans could occupy, that they tend to siphon money away from the black community. In effect, I think it was scapegoating in that the Koreans were not really the root of their problem, but they thought they were.
Partially it's because there's nobody else around. The people who are really responsible, the banks who redline South Central LA, the corporations which laid people off or refused to hire people, the public institutions that don't admit inner city kids, they're all out of reach, just like most of the wealthy taxpayers are. They're in their gated communities. They're on the other side of town. So the ethnic middleman community becomes then the lightning rod. They're the convenient scapegoat, whether they're Jews or Palestinians or Indians, Koreans.
1990년대 초 뉴욕에서 흑인들의 레드 애플 마켓에 대한 불매 운동을 계기로 한흑 갈등이 미 전국 뉴스로 부각되었다. 이어 로스앤젤레스의 불매 운동이 브라더후드 크루세이드의 데니 베이크웰의 주도로 이루어졌다. 그때부터 한흑 갈등에 대한 기사는 주류 언론사의 단골 기사거리로 등장했다.
That in looking back on the early 90s, it's important to remember that the economy was in a state of recession. So there was a lot of tension developing because of problems in the economy, both locally and nationally. In a city where members of different ethnic groups are coexisting in the same place, it's not surprising that members of one ethnic group might blame another member, a different ethnic group, for problems that are taking place.
What took place in the years leading up to the riots was a series of stories that was reported in the LA Times and other national media outlets that involved merchant-customer disputes. If the racial equation did not add up to Korean merchant and African-American customer, stories of conflict involving merchant and customers were thrown out.
News media they always have their antenna up for various forms of conflict. And so if you have ready-made conflicts, or at least the perception of ready-made conflicts, like black-Korean tension, they're always in a position to try to exploit that.
For every incident of conflict that involved a Korean merchant and African-American customer, there were probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of transactions that went on between Korean merchants and African-American customers that did not result in violence or harm to either party.
Well, there's a disconnect between how the real world works and how people really are getting along versus the way the media is portraying the alleged conflict between blacks and, say, Korean Americans.
그 당시 두 커뮤니티 관계를 개선하려는 많은 노력들이 있었다.
There were some efforts by Korean American community and African American activists to try to mediate the whole situation. It went on for several years, and the city didn't give any resources. Nobody really gave any resources. It was purely voluntary organization, and remarkable that it went on for 6 years. But sadly, when BKA announced that they are no longer going to continue, it made all the news media. When they were trying to do all the positive works, nobody cares.
What they don't understand is how they often are complicit with the very things that they're supposedly covering, And I think by covering conflict to the exclusion of harmony and collaboration and some of the other things that obviously happen in LA and between blacks and Koreans, they for a lot of people who don't know any better or who get all of their information through media or most of what they know about the topic through media, they can shape, their attitudes to a pretty large degree, which may also influence behavior.
The way the Korean American community tried to figure out what was wrong and had all sorts of meetings and wanted to reach out to the black community demonstrates their lack of racism.
언론 매체들의 한흑 갈등에서의 집착은 마치 한인 사회와 한인들의 문화적인 무지함이 사우스 센트럴 문제의 핵심 원인인 것처럼 보이게 만듭니다.